My best friend has crossed the point of no return, IV heroin. I am watching his life fall apart before my eyes and feel completely helpless to do anything about it. I'm no stranger to drugs. I've tried almost anything anyone has ever put in front of me, and despite that, I've never struggled with substance abuse at any point in my entire life. Never let any drug become a daily thing, besides weed at certain periods in my life, but I've always been able to cold turkey if necessary, and I'm talking stims, opiates, and everything in between. Never had cravings I couldn't just toss aside. Honestly, I feel like I'm too busy with my job, hobbies, and personal relationships to ever have the time to be a drug addict. I just don't have enough time to get high, and I'm not in love with it enough to make time. Drugs are just something I do for fun sometimes. Throughout my life, most of my friends have been similar to me in this way. I've done more drugs than most of them, but only two of friends who have tried as many different substances as I have. One of them was a polydrug abuser who finally got clean in 2017 after some ODs and is still clean to this day, genuinely living his best life. The other is my best friend, who for the sake of anonymity we will call Rodney. We were roommates for a few years until I moved in with my girlfriend in April of last year. We've been through a ton together and have been friends for 10 years as of this summer, and extremely close for the past 5. When we lost our townhouse due to my ex causing a ton of shit and eventually withholding rent, my mom took the both of us in until we were able to get back on our feet. That's where the situation I'm asking for advice on today really begins. Before we lost our townhouse in mid-2019, Rodney was in a pretty experimental phase of his drug use. He was doing a lot of hallucinogens and Xanax, and because it was in front of me so much I would indulge too, although not as frequently as him. I was personally doing a lot of coke at the time, which he wasn't really engaging in with me, saying the hangovers were too much for him at the time and he found the days after too depressing. The Xans got pretty out of hand for him. He pretty much traded in his average of smoking a half ounce of shatter every pay period to maybe 1 or 2 grams and just got fucked on benzos all day instead. Told me they helped him feel human, as he suffered from pretty severe anxiety, and I did too, so I was sensitive to that. Once our supplier's stock started getting inconsistent, he eventually drew back out of necessity because he couldn't handle the withdrawals. Shortly after this is where we moved in with my mom. My mom and her husband are extremely anti-substance. They rarely drink and have both never so much as been in the same room as a joint willingly. It shouldn't surprise anyone that our being welcome pivoted pretty directly on the understanding that we wouldn't be bringing any drugs into the house. Rodney, who hasn't spent a day sober since we were 13 years old, actually acclimated shockingly quickly. He respected my parents' rules and kept any shatter he had in his toolbox at work. It's legal here, Canada, but rarely smoked it simply due to the inconvenience of it. Suddenly drug use was something that he only really engaged in social settings, even with weed. Things were good for us. Come December of that year though, that all changed. Rodney went to Christmas dinner at his family home and was surprised that his dad wasn't there. His parents had recently split up and moved into separate apartments, but were still close friends living in the same building and saw each other frequently, so it didn't make sense for him to not be there. Rodney's twin brother arrived late to the dinner and was a bit upset, informing everybody that their dad had called him that day with some news. Turns out their dad is gay, but being an older dude stayed in the closet due to fear of discrimination for his whole life. He had made the decision to move back to Ontario because he had been in a secret relationship with his boyfriend for an undeclared period of time and couldn't really handle facing the family he raised. The dude literally told one of his 3 kids, "Hey, I'm gay, I have a boyfriend and I'm running away with him, if you could let your mom and siblings know for me that'd be great," and walked out of their lives completely. On fucking Christmas. Nobody in that room handled it particularly well, understandably so, but Rodney took it really hard. Overnight the guy shut me out emotionally. He wouldn't go into details about what was on his mind like he usually did, and I didn't want to push him. I figured he just needed time to process what he was facing. To this day, my idea of how he felt at that time is entirely based off of assumption and observation. He became severely depressed. He found a new Xanax dealer, my other clean buddy's old connect, who I regrettably introduced him to several years prior, and started buying them by the hundreds. For months this dude just popped bar after bar until they barely did shit to him anymore. He ended up getting very close to an older man who runs a popular sandwich shop and deli in our town, as one of our mutual friends would go there to smoke weed with him in the back room sometimes. They liked his stories. He led a very interesting life. There is a Sundance Festival award-winning documentary about this particular deli owner, I'm not even shitting you. Well, after a bit Rodney had been going there long enough for this deli owner to open up to him about the fact that he frequently smoked crystal meth. Rodney, being no stranger to trying new substances and in a particularly vulnerable state, asked if he could try it. Deli Guy wouldn't let him for a long while, but eventually cracked after a few weeks of pestering. He smoked meth every other day for 2 weeks after that, didn't sleep for most of it and still went to work every single day through it all. He got reckless about drugs in my parents' place. He'd be so fucked up on Xans he'd pass out in random spots in the house and would be so wired other times he'd start cleaning the kitchen at 2 a.m. and wake everyone up. My parents aren't idiots, they knew something was up, and it all came to a head when he started getting so fucked up on the Xans that he'd start sparking joints right there in his bedroom without being lucid enough to remember he wasn't allowed. My parents were aware of the situation with his dad and were trying to be sensitive to it, but they gave him the ultimatum that if this shit didn't stop immediately he wasn't gonna be allowed to live there anymore. They didn't know what he was on, they just wanted it to stop and gave him another chance. I ended up coming clean to all of our other friends that Rodney was going off the rails during a mushroom trip I was on when he wasn't there. My entire life had become mitigating the tension between him and my parents, and the stress of it all was too much for me. He wasn't himself, he wasn't opening up to me anymore, and I was losing my best friend. I needed help getting through to him. He refused to talk about the substance use with anyone, and kept telling people we were all freaking out over nothing and turning him into some kind of spectacle that we could judge for entertainment. It was never like that, but that didn't stop him from permanently cutting several of our close friends out of his life because they weren't supporting him. He just convinced himself that nobody actually cared and they just wanted something to gossip about. He got kicked out of my parents last April, and moved into a shitty motel in our town on a weekly rate for a bit. He was super fucked on Xans one day and came clean to me that he started having sex with the Deli Guy during their meth sessions. I don't know if he even remembers telling me. Said he's not gay but he likes to get off or some shit. It seemed to me like he was really questioning his identity after everything with his dad, and was going off the rails trying to get his head in order and was doing a dangerously poor job at it. I started to withdraw from him after he got kicked out of my mom's. He wouldn't listen to me anymore and it hurt me too much to force it. By this point the pandemic was in full swing. I'd see him outside my house from time to time and he told me he was cleaning up, not doing the Xans anymore. He had a fair number of other drug stories, however, mostly cocaine binges, despite the fact that he used to hate blow but was suddenly all for it. He would talk about hanging out with other people who I'd never met, doing drugs with them. He'd always keep it vague though, and even when I'd call him out on it he'd never go into detail about what he was doing with them. Aside from the mysteriousness, he seemed like he was pretty much back to his old self for a while. When we hung out it finally felt normal. Sure, he had his drug stories, but they were much more in tune with the occasional fun-type stories they used to be for us than the constant it became for him at one point. I thought he was getting better. I was wrong. Our plug started selling hydros. I don't mess with opiates anymore. My girlfriend's dad is an addict who abandoned them when she was 11 and I won't touch them out of respect for her. But Rodney picked a few up and took them to a test site. They were clean, no fent at all. He flaunted that receipt like he'd just found the damn Ark of the Covenant or some shit. Suddenly, he was doing hydros almost daily. He justified it in his head that, because they were clean, they were safe. Kept trying to do them with me but I refused. At first, he was fine not bringing them around me. But as time went on and the pandemic restrictions relaxed to allow in-home gatherings again, he started disappearing to the bathroom for a while when he'd come over and come out nodding like a madman. I didn't say much. Felt like the words would be wasted on him. I thought that, maybe, if I was just there for him emotionally while he worked through everything it would all be okay. Then the safe supply came. During the pandemic, our government began prescribing opiates for recreational use to addicts because our street opiate supply was so overridden with fent. He also has to take methadone with it to get the hydros, but he still gets 4 milligrams hydros a day from the pharmacy. That was a problem, because he wasn't doing anywhere near that many hydros before due to cost, but with the safe supply all he had to pay was a dispensing fee, around the cost of a single pill from the plug. His tolerance shot through the roof. Within less than a month of him getting the safe supply, him and I had planned a coke night with another buddy of ours. This was last weekend. We picked up the coke, and he asked me to give him a ride to this random address in town. I pulled up outside and it was junkies as far as the eye could see, a couple cops posted up, and what looked to be some kind of social service building. He ran inside for a minute and came back out with a paper bag. I asked him what it was and he confessed to me that his tolerance has gotten too high to do the hydros nasally, so he's been going to the safe injection sites to get supplies he can with. He also confessed to me that he had bought some heroin from one of the junkies outside, just for the come down, in case he ran out of hydros by the time the blow was gone. He told me that he is just having fun, and that I have nothing to worry about, that he's not some lazy junkie, he still has his shit together etc. Then he admitted he's been banging it for a few weeks now, and last time he was at my place the reason he was nodding out so harsh is because he was still nailing down the right IV dose. I pretended in the moment that I believed him. That it was no big deal. We went through that coke night with him sticking a needle in his arm every time he wanted to dose, coke, hydros and heroin direct into his veins. I hated every second of it, but I didn't want him to feel judged so I kept my mouth shut, told myself that if things got bad I'd freak out then. And yet every single day since that coke night I can barely sleep. I keep thinking about this dark-ass road he's decided to walk down and genuinely think he's lost his fucking mind. This dude is like my brother and I feel like he has a disease and I'm watching him die. He's so convincing when he talks like it's all no big deal but it is a big deal, right? Is there any such thing as a functional, recreational IV heroin user? Am I insane for even considering the fact that that could exist? I don't want to lose my brother, but I don't know what I can do to help him. I feel like if I push back on him about this he will cut me out. I don't want him to feel alone, I want him to feel supported, but it's so beyond time for him to get clean. He's suffering. He's killing himself day by day and I don't know how to help him. Do I give him an ultimatum? Do I tell him that he's gotta choose between me or the drugs? Do I tell his mom? I swear to God if I do nothing and something does happen to him I will never forgive myself. I just don't know what to do. I know that he's dealing with severe mental health struggles but I feel like he's just running away. He won't talk to me or open up to me about any of it anymore. Ever since his dad, he hasn't been the same. I just want my brother back. Any advice that you guys can give I would really appreciate. I just feel so lost. Update. Before I get into the update, I just want to quickly thank everyone who reached out. Your advice was reaffirming and although I wasn't necessarily comforted by a lot of it, I certainly felt a clearer head. Things got a lot worse after writing my last post. Rodney's 24th birthday is at the end of this month and when we still lived together a massive hobby we both shared was record collecting. He got into it because I had a turntable and stereo in our townhouse and he wanted to be able to have records of his own to listen to on it. He was uninterested in getting his own after I moved in with my girlfriend, mostly because he was too preoccupied with his drug use. He'd still buy records with me, but he would only listen to them on my turntable at my house. I sold him my old stereo when I did some upgrading last summer, and the only thing he needed was a turntable of his own to start listening to his records again. I had the idea that, if I got him his own turntable, maybe he would be able to start reconnecting with hobbies again and be able to get his mind right before the heroin use got out of hand. I got him a beautiful vintage deck and had it refurbished with a fresh cartridge installed. I decided to give it to him early. Wrapped it and everything and got him a few crates to store his records in since he could take them home now. I invited him over and didn't say anything about a gift, I wanted it to be a surprise, but unfortunately he never showed up. I spam called texted but got nothing. He eventually called me hours after he was supposed to come by sounding absolutely high off his dome, said he fell asleep and just woke up. I told him he had to come through the following day to make it up to me. He agreed. The next day he got sent home from work as his boss said he was visibly inebriated and was a safety concern for the shop. He lost it on his boss and threw everything away by quitting on the spot. This was a new boss at his shop, his old boss who he worked under for over a half-decade, completed his entire apprenticeship with, got his certification with, recently moved up in the company and isn't really there to advocate for him now. They tried to talk him out of it but he walked out. Eventually, several hours late, he did make it to my house. He looked haggard, and his voice sounded all creaky and barely coherent. Before he would even talk to me he said he needed to use the bathroom. Stayed in there for a half hour. Came out barely able to stand straight and called his regional manager while completely blasted to yell about how offended he was by what his direct superior had done. I tried to get him off the phone but he essentially just did everything he could to burn that bridge right to the fucking ground. They won't take his calls now. He opened his turntable. He cried when he saw it. Thanked me up and down and told me how much it meant to him. Then nodded off halfway through expressing his gratitude. When he eventually came to he didn't even remember the turntable interaction. Just kept yelling incoherently about how his boss only sent him home cause he feels threatened, and he jealous that Rodney has the highest numbers in the shop. He cycled through that for a few hours. It was excruciating. I mean, I guess I'm the idiot for thinking that buying him the one thing he needed to reconnect with his hobby would fix everything. It hurt my feelings a little bit though, admittedly, that he seemed to lose interest so fast. He was so far removed from logical thought, he didn't even seem like the same person. I felt in that moment the way I assume people do when dealing with belligerent alcoholic family members. From that moment I knew that I was going to have to confront him and tell him that if he wasn't willing to get clean, I was gonna have to take a step back until he was. I dropped him off at home that night and helped him bring his stuff up. I needed time to think before going ahead with this. Said goodbyes and just cried into my girlfriend's arms for hours. I was just so angry. He knew better. I was furious that he had taken shit this far and now I was gonna lose one of the most important people in the world to me because of drugs. I felt so numb by the time I settled down. It was an awful night. I ended up telling our clean friend I mentioned in the last post, I'm just gonna name him Jackson for simplicity, everything, as he worked for a rehab center in our city during his recovery for years and still had connections there. He basically agreed that I had to stop enabling Rodney and agreed with my plan to take a step back. I took the weekend and spent some time with two of my other close friends, just longboarding around a park in our town enjoying the sunshine to clear my head. Yesterday I went downtown and bought some records for myself and went to the beach with my girlfriend. It was all exactly what I needed just to feel human for a second. This morning, Jackson messaged me. Rodney had reached out to him and come clean about everything. The full story I told you guys plus the fact that the only thing he can think about is shooting up and he needs to inject his full daily allotment of hydros, 24 milligrams, at once just to feel anything. That he's been doing tons of heroin fentanyl just to fight off withdrawals. And he admitted that he was in way too deep and was utterly terrified for his life. I messaged him immediately and just said good morning to him and that I hoped his weekend went well. Reminded him I loved him. He told me right away about the conversation he was having with Jackson and he told me he needed to go to rehab. How he needed help. How he just wanted to be happy with his life again and doesn't want to lose everything. We talked all morning this morning. Rodney told me he made it all through yesterday without shooting any heroin but he cracked this morning. Scraped all his tins for anything he could get. He told me he felt so out of control of himself and he just needs support to get better. He's ready to get clean. He doesn't want to be just another junkie. We're still messaging back and forth a little. I'm talking to Jackson in the back end. Jackson just told me he's pulled some strings to get Rodney into the rehab that saved his life 4 years ago. He's getting admitted tomorrow morning. Rodney can't afford it but somehow Jackson has negotiated a reduced rate for Rodney to go and has taken care of his first month's cost, a few grand, not even joking. They're gonna help him get some income assistance and they're gonna accept whatever the government is willing to provide even if it doesn't pay the cost in full. I cried at my desk. I'm so damn proud of him for taking this step and, in a way, I'm also relieved that I didn't need to force it. My boy is still in there. He still cares about himself. He still loves me. And now he's gonna get better. And I'm back crying at my desk. Huh. Thank you again, all of you, for talking me through all this on my last post. I appreciate every one of you. TLDR, he's going to rehab. He ended up realizing how fast he is going down the tubes and made that decision without confrontation from anyone. He gets admitted tomorrow morning and my main focus now is just being there for him. Update, October 12, 2022. The original post feels like a lifetime ago at this point, but I still get messages on this account from time to time asking about Rodney or for advice on how to help their own loved ones, and I figured now is as good a time as any to give everyone some closure. Jackson was able to make good on his promise and Rodney went to rehab, as planned, that next morning. He had picked up his prescription hydros he was getting at the time and injected all 6 of them right before going into the building. According to Rodney, they barely hit him. Jackson said it is some kind of a rite of passage when addicts head into rehab, gives them closure. Evidently it didn't do any more damage than it already had. The rehab Rodney went to was inpatient, and was able to give him a lot of resources that he, previously, hadn't had access to. Counseling helped him sort out some issues he had and a psychiatrist was able to prescribe him some medications to help level out his, previously undiagnosed, bipolar disorder. He was on Suboxone for some time as well but stopped at some point. He spent 3 months in first-stage recovery where he wasn't allowed out without a chaperone, but moved into a second-stage house after the fact. Second stage functioned a lot like a halfway house, a sober living facility that they just had to be back at every night. He got a sponsor and took on his own sponsee after he got his 6-month chip. He continued living in second stage for over a year after that and became employed by the rehab facility he went to within a few months of being in second stage as a house manager. He kept that job until he began pursuing a college education in social work at the beginning of this year. He even made Dean's List in his first semester. Although almost everybody at his center said there's no such thing as a one and done, Rodney was. I spoke at his one-year cake back in April, the week of his 25th, tears were shed, laughs were had. It was a huge meeting with a tons, and it was really heartwarming to see so many people all there to support each other. It was also good for me as, because of Rodney's rehab being a decent distance from our old neighborhood, we don't get to spend nearly as much time together as we used to. That's fine by me, I'm just glad he's still here with a life to live, but I miss him. He moved out of his second stage house just under 2 weeks ago. He's staying with his mom while he finds his footing for his first stint outside the recovery world since he got clean. He's working hard on his studies. He never relapsed. He's insanely committed to his sobriety, as he should be. And, most importantly, my boy is alive, and, honestly, better off than he was to begin with. I'm glad that this is how it all ended up. Thank you to all the folks who reached out with supportive words when I first posted these. To anyone who reached out to me who were in similar circumstances, I hope your story has an equally happy ending. Same goes for anyone that ever reads these threads again, and if you ever need support, don't hesitate to reach out. There is hope. Thanks for reading, guys. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to connect with each other in the comments below. Until next time, be kind, be curious, and I'll catch you in the next video. Corner Stories signing off.